Yes. How's it
Okay.
going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions, and it is my absolute pleasure to get to talk to my all-time favorite Wolverine writer, one of my favorite writers of all time. But he's not just a writer; he did so much more than that. Also, a musician, also an actor, all kinds of things. Larry, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing excellent now that I'm getting the chance to talk to you. I've ran into you at conventions over the years. I've interviewed you at conventions, but this is the first time we've had an internet call, if you will. So this
Okay.
is really nice. I really appreciate your time. Um, so yeah, I was just talking to you behind the scenes about how much you have played a part, and I wasn't aware when I was a kid, right? Anywhere from like things I didn't. I mean, I knew I was a fan of GI Joe and Wolverine, my all-time favorite character. I remember you did Nth Man, the Ultimate Ninja, which I still want as an omnibus one day. Then Nam and all these other stories. But then I found out you were also an editor because I knew you were a writer and artist. And then like even things like Bucky O'Hare, like things I didn't even think about that were a part of my childhood. How did your journey with comics even begin?
Almost by accident. Um,
Okay.
uh, I hadn't really been all that interested in comics, but I applied to and was accepted at the New York City's High School of Art and Design, um, which is as a singular institution has produced more comic book professionals than any other school I could think of. If you go to the High School of Art and Design alumni list, you will find like everybody from Alex Toth through Dick Giordano, uh, Neil Adams, Michael Stewart, Dennis Cowan, Joe Jusko. Uh, the list just goes on, and Tony Bennett. People like that. So I had originally been interested in being a fashion designer or a fashion illustrator, but I decided to like major in illustration. But on my first day at this new high school, I didn't know anybody there, not a soul, and I'm sitting by myself in the cafeteria at lunch, and this tall African American kid walks up to me, total stranger, and he says, "Hi, do you like comics?" And I said, "No."
Okay.
And he was really persistent. He said, my name is John Smith. That was his real name, J.D. Smith.
Okay.
I know some real cartoonists, and like, and he was going on and on and on about that. And he said, I'm going to go visit, this cartoonist I know named Larry Ivy, and he's good friends with Wally Wood and Al Williamson and all these other people, and Frank Frazetta.
Did you know those names at that time?
I knew who they were. Yeah,
Okay.
I read comics.
Okay.
I mean, I had a stack, from when I was a kid. I was mostly, when I was really young, interested in Uncle Scrooge, the Carl Barks comics.
A man of taste.
Then when I was older, I was reading Batman and Superman and those. And at the very beginning, the early Marvel stuff. I used to love the Marvel journey into mystery type books, with the Steve Ditko weird monster art. And so I went along with JD. I met Larry Ivy, and I eventually met Wally Wood and Williamson, and there was a whole little society of comic book artists that lived on the Upper West Side, and I got to meet all of them. And Larry Ivy hooked me up with Castle of Frankenstein magazine. I was like, a kid in high school, and I got an after-school job doing paste ups and stuff for Castle of Frankenstein. And I got to meet, and I met Bob Stewart, who pretty much introduced me to all this other stuff and got me into the underground comics. And that's how I met Vaughn Bodie, and because he was putting out a tabloid called Gothic Blimp Works, which was the Sunday funnies of the East Village Other. And in that publication, he had Art Crum, Art Spiegelman, Spain Rodriguez, Trina Robbins, Kim Deitch, Jay Kinney, Jay Lynch, pretty much everybody that started underground comics, including me and two other young upstarts named Mike Kaluta and, and Bernie Wrightson.
All these names. This
is
is crazy.
Where we could actually get print, because we couldn't get our feet, in the door at, Marvel or DC. They were sort of pretty much closed shops. And and we had a group show at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C. in like 1968, I think. But that was how I got my feet in the door doing comics.
Mm-hmm.
When I got out of the Army, my a friend from high school, Ralph Reese, I got together with him, and he said, look, you can pencil faster than I can pencil, and I can ink faster than you can ink. If we combined our skills, we could, really sort of knock this stuff out, and actually maybe make some money doing this. So I thought, so he said, let's start a comic book studio together, illustration studio. So I partnered up with him, and we did black and white horror comics and Lana Johnson, a budding National Lampoon, and for Children's Television Workshop. We did illustrations for Esquire, Rolling Stone, but it's freelance work. It's erratic. I said I really sort of need some sort of a steady income. So Ralph hooked me up with Wally Wood out in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And, I went to work for him as his assistant, and I was lettering Canon and Sally Forth for the Overseas Weekly. And then we started alternating. I would write the script for Sally Forth while Woody wrote Canon, and then we'd switch. And then he got me started on cutting zip and looking up swipe, and then eventually, penciling backgrounds and doing background figures. And that was my original apprenticeship. I really learned a lot from working for Wally Wood. And when Wally Wood moved to Connecticut, he fixed me up with Neil Adams at Continuity. So I went right over to Continuity. I was renting desk space there for $50 a month and all the coffee I could drink. And I started getting storyboard work and motion board work from Continuity to supplement, what I was doing. And then actually that sort of took over for a while because there was a lot more money in doing advertising than doing comics. My first comic book job, well, actually the second, but the first one was an 8-page story for DC for Sinister House of Secrets.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I got it was that Neil said, if you give this new kid a chance to pencil, I'll ink it. So he inked my first 8-page story at DC. Neil got in at DC and he stuck his foot in the door and he held it open for all of us. He shoehorned in Kaluta and Wrightson and Jeff Jones and all these people who did not fit the DC house style at all. And really neither did I. But that job led me to doing some horror stuff at Marvel. And then I eventually got Iron Fist to draw. I think Gil Kane did the first issue, and then I took it over from Gil Kane. Um, my starting rate for full pencils at Marvel was $23 a page, and I was lucky if I could complete one page a day. Um, so I was really making less drawing a monthly Marvel comic than I could have flipping burgers at Mickey D's. I remember
$23.
when I told my mom that, hey mom, I've now got a monthly Marvel comic, and she said, "Oh, well, that's nice. So when are you going to get a real job?"
I can see my mom and dad saying that now, right? They still don't understand the whole YouTube thing. That's $23 a page. Do you remember what year that was?
It was a big deal when I got a $2 raise to $25. And this was before incentives or royalties. That's the only money you ever saw. Plus,
so you didn't even get to keep your artwork at that time, right? It just
no, you got it, but you had to split it with the writer and the inker.
Yeah.
For some reason, because all the editors were writers, so they had it fixed so that they got pages out of the job, which Neil was adamantly against. But yeah, that's the way it was. It was the rates were really, really low. There were no royalties. That was the only money you got.
Mm-hmm.
But Neil and Jim Shooter changed all that.
Yeah, I've talked to you often whenever we meet about the legacy of Jim Shooter and what he did at Marvel Comics and what he did for the writers and artists at the time. And you spoke fondly of that era and just how close everybody was too. And I know you and Neil were really close as well.
Mm-hmm.
You went on to become, like, you went from penciling. How did you get the position of editor at the time?
I think I had just finished the West Coast tour of Pacific Overture, Stephen Sondheim musical. I'd done the original on Broadway, and then I went on tour with it to Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I came back to New York, and I was going, well, what am I going to do now? And Neil set me up with an interview with Jeanette Kahn, and she offered me an editor's job at DC. This was at what they call the DC explosion. They expanded, and they hired like me and Al Milgrom as two new editors. And a year later, they had the implosion, and me and Al got the old boot, which was actually the best thing that ever happened to me, because Al Milgrom went straight over to Marvel, and after a couple of months, he calls me and said, "Hey, the water's fine. You should come over here." And that's how I ended up being an editor of Marvel. I was hired by Jim Shooter to be the editor of Crazy magazine. So Crazy magazine only lasted a couple of more years. It was sort of killed by the entire video game explosion. All the quarters the kids used to plunk down for humor magazines and comics were going into video game slots. So that's when I inherited all the Conan titles. So I became the Conan editor.
So, and when you became the Conan editor, I love those books, and I've read every one of the introductions, and each one of those are done by whoever was editor at the time. Like, you had Roy Thomas, or sometimes it was one of the writers too. Do you remember your time there, coming into Conan the Barbarian, and like?
Oh yeah, I mean,
that must have been.
I was a major fan of Conan the Barbarian. I had read the hardcovers because they were in my local public library. The original what was it called? Goblin Press or whatever. There were, hardcover editions that had Emshwiller covers on them. So I knew all the stories, and
Yeah.
of course, when the Ace paperbacks came out with the Frazetta covers, I gobbled them up. So I was pretty familiar with the character and the properties.
Was it a difficult task to take on after, Roy Thomas was on the run for so long, and then finding the right writer? Because you actually wrote some issues of, if I remember correctly, right, of Conan the Barbarian, like in the 100s.
I wrote a few, yeah.
Yeah.
That was after I was in it. You can't write for the books that you're editing. So this was after that. Yeah, and eventually I think Christopher Priest took over those books for a while. And he was my hire from. I hired him as like a teenage. He was a teenage intern working with the previous editor for no money, and I put him on the payroll, and I said, "Okay, now you're the managing editor of Crazy Magazine."
You put him on the payroll. I love that. It's crazy to think about.
Got him on the health plan, and got him started writing.
It's crazy to think about the ages of these creators at that time.
Yeah.
Because to me, like, as a fan, you never think about, well, the internet has changed everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I was a kid, I never thought about what people look like. I thought books just magically appeared, made by wonderful, wonderful godlike beings.
I don't know how many times I've heard people, when I said, "Oh, I write and draw comics," people have actually said, "Somebody does that?"
Right, and that's kind of like that.
It's one of those magical things that appear out of the ether.
Yeah, it's weird to describe that to people nowadays because you can just Google Larry Hama and there's your picture and there's everything you've done, and it's just like at the time when we were young, we just did. It wasn't, I don't think, until Wizard magazine started like showing the top 10 best artists, the top 10 monthly best writers. It's really cool, like, to see. I don't think I ever thought, like, some of my friends thought like Jim Lee and Stan Lee were related, or Jay Lee and Jim Lee were brothers and things like that. But I just never thought of like putting faces with names and things like that.
Well, there's still, I remember just the other day, somebody posted a photo online on Facebook of themselves with Sid Mead, and I had no idea what Sid Mead looked like. Although I've been a huge fan of his stuff from way back. You know who Sid Mead is, right?
Yes, sir.
He was an illustrator, started out in Detroit, doing these incredible renderings of cars and scenes. And then he designed pretty much all the Star Wars. That's all Sid Mead. He was a concept artist. And they've published numbers of books of his stuff, but they used to call him a futurist. He did, future stuff. And, I saw this photo and it's like, oh, this is me with Sid Mead. And it's like, holy smoke, he just looks like a regular guy. I sort of pictured him like, well, you know how they used to portray like cartoonists and comic book artists and stuff in movies and TV, like, oh, they had these like, immense studios with skylights, and they had actual live models, and
oh yeah,
they were, like sitting around wearing smoking jackets and smoking pipes, and no cartoonist I ever knew looked like that.
And this is coming from somebody that's an actor too. How did you even find the time to do all of this? Because you must have been busy. And I'm not saying it all happened at the same time, right?
No.
But you were editing, you were writing, and you're also an artist too.
Well, I
It's
drew comics for years before they let me write one.
and they gave you a shot, and I love that.
They didn't. I got it. I was literally the last person they asked to write G.I. Joe.
You told me this story, which is insane because I don't know if people know how much G.I. Joe you wrote, but there is no G.I. Joe without Larry Hama. Like, I'm not exaggerating. It was just about every one of those issues printed in Marvel, 155 issues. I think, give or take, maybe like 6 or 7 you didn't write, I don't think.
Maybe like 5 or 6 at the most.
Yeah, that was pretty close. And then every single one of the issues from 156 to 300, and I think they even had like a half issue too at IDW. 150, is it 155 or 156 and a half? I think one of those. And now you're still writing that story. And the best part about this, I don't know if people realize, because I do get asked this question often, is that it's in G.I. Joe is in the Hama, what I like to call the Larry Hama universe of G.I. Joe. It's not affected by anything else. There's never been like you don't have to do like the forced crossovers like everybody else does. Like, oh, we got to add rum to this story, Larry.
I tried to keep my universe pretty distinct and pure. The problem was every time somebody else would get the license, they would figure, oh, we can do it better than Hama, and they'd get somebody in to write the main book. I mean, they didn't even offer me the main book, the main title at Devil's Due or IDW. I had to chart out my own little course there, and but it turned out that my books were the ones that were selling, so that's what, and I was glad that I kept my universe separate because I didn't want to have to these other writers they made up all this stuff and killed off characters and added characters, and I ignored that all. I tried to keep my canon very separate. It's like when I took over Wolverine, I knew very little about the character. I took the 2 interns from Bob Harris's office out to lunch, and I picked their brains over lunch. I said, well, what do you like about Wolverine? What don't you like about Wolverine? And then I went back and I read a whole bunch of back issues, and I decided that I didn't like most of what was there.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked was the Claremont, Frank Miller, and Barry Windsor Smith takes. So that's what I considered the canon: Claremont, Smith, and Frank Miller. And I ignored everything else.
That's why you took him back to Japan in your first stories then, because I mean those were the Miller and Claremont stories. I love from the beginning. I was like, oh, this guy knows this character. You could have fooled me when you were like, I've never read Wolverine, or I didn't know the character. That's hilarious, because to me as a kid, I'm like, oh, this new writer, he's so good. He gets the voice, he gets the character.
I think part of that is you can't be a completist about when they say, oh, it's canon because it got printed. Well, some of it got printed because they had to print it, because they had inventory issues that they had to slug in or whatever. So, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I thought was like totally wrong. There was one writer that wrote this entire thing about how Wolverine was absolutely afraid of cyber, and I thought, well, that's really silly. I mean, Wolverine isn't afraid of anybody that violates his character. So I ignored that completely.
Wait a minute. But I remember what you did with cyber later on. So was that your way of dealing with that fear? That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. I know exactly what you're talking about. I love that. I actually love that story. It's got Sam Keith's beautiful artwork in it too. And you worked with some phenomenal artists too on your run. Larry, I wasn't even ready to move on to Wolverine. My body and mind were not ready to talk about Wolverine with you because, oh my gosh, I love your run. I was still focusing on G.I. Joe. But since you brought it up, oh, by all means, yes, let's talk about Wolverine. You were teamed up with some amazing artists on that run. Mark Silvestri, Adam Kubert, Mark Teixeira. I never know how to pronounce the gentleman's name. I always butcher it. So I just call him Tex, is what I usually call him for short. Like I think we all did in the 90s. Jander, I think Jander Sema ended up taking over the book. Val Semaic, who you worked with, I think, on Conan, right? Like he had drawn some Conan today.
He worked for me on Conan, and that's where I knew him. And the later books were Laniel Francis Yu.
So, oh my gosh, I love the way he drew like Wolverine putting his mask on. It looks so different, so badass. Oh, I love that run. Yeah, you stayed on that book for a long time. Not as long as G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe. Yeah. I don't think I can separate.
I'm up to 314.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you don't get you. There's never been a moment where you're like, I think that's enough Joe for now. You know, I think I've told every story. Like, you've never had that moment?
No. It's like going home. You know, I mean, I don't mind doing the G.I. Joe stuff because I don't really have to think about it. You know, I don't. It's like, okay, you know, lots of times it's, oh, you want to do such and such book. Oh man, I got to go back and read 5 years worth of this. You know, so, oh my God. You know, when they asked me to write the novelization of The Death of Captain America, you know, I hadn't read a Captain American since Jack Kirby was drawing it. So,
Larry, that's been a long time.
There's a lot to catch up on, you know. But so I read the previous 5 years or something, or 6 years,
okay.
and got the editorial people to fill me in on other details. The problem was they had messed up with the deadlines, and there was only 3 months left to write the book. I had 3 months to write the.
To write a novel? The novelization of adaptation.
Novelization of The Death of Captain America based on the Brubaker plotline. And so I had to go back and read all those Brubaker issues and read the backstories for all these other characters. And when I sat down to actually write it, I realized, oh, geez, so much of it is just people sitting around in rooms talking.
Oh yeah, the writing style has definitely changed.
Look, I'm gonna project, you know, what's in between these people talking, and you know, try to inject some action in here. But I got it out the door in 3 months, and they eventually made an audio book out of it. It wasn't just. The audiobook was really weird. It wasn't just somebody reading what I wrote, but it was dramatized.
Oh, so they were acting out?
Yeah, they were acting the stuff out. They had sound effects and music and everything. It's worth picking up.
Well, here is a comment about your G.I. Joe. I love your work on G.I. Joe, Mr. Hama. Been a fan for many years now, and I look forward to getting the upcoming compendium trade paperback by Image Skybound, which I believe that is due out next month. And then in December is when they're going to start sending out the Kickstarters for that Skybound collection.
I was completely taken by surprise by that, I thought.
The most successful comic book Kickstarter? You were taken by surprise? I love hearing that.
I was like totally flat-footed. I said, what?
I think it's wonderful, and I know your hand must have been tired because you did a lot of signing.
Book plates, yeah.
You did a lot of book plates inside. They were gone.
Oh yeah, I think the first batch disappeared in less than 7 minutes or something. It was really
that's awesome. You know, one of my
as fast as San Diego tickets.
Those things have been going fast again. I can't believe it. Larry, you mentioned something. I follow you on all your social media posts, and not that I get on there often, but one of the things you mentioned was going back to signing and sketching. I had met you at conventions when you weren't charging for your sketches, and then you mentioned something. What Neil Adams told you, something about charging for sketches, and I thought that was a really cool thing because Neil was always taking care of. Like, it felt like Neil was taking care of people without realizing it, or maybe he did. I don't know.
Well, I think anybody who's ever collected a royalty check or an incentive check from a comic book company should have gotten down on their hands and knees and thanked Neil Adams, because he's the one that pushed all that through, and he spent money out of his own pocket on legal fees and all this stuff. He's the guy who hired the lawyer.
Oh yeah,
to represent Siegel and Schuster. He paid for that out of his own pocket. That was Byron Price's dad, Edmund Price, who was also my lawyer. But yeah, Neil was the guy. Well, the thing is, I was at some maybe it was Chicago or something, but I went out to, and I wasn't really. I think I was charging $20 for a sketch at that point. I started charging like a nominal fee when I discovered that if I did it for free, I would find them in the wastebasket.
That's tough.
Yeah, because if people walk by and they say you're doing something for free, they don't even know who you are. They don't care who you are. I'll get it for free. So I spent time doing this sketch for them. They walk away, and after 5 minutes, they're tired of carrying it around. So they chuck it. So that's when I started charging for them. But then I found out that, people were putting them up on eBay and getting like $100, $200 for, a sketch I gave them for $20. And I was, I'll bite the bullet on it. But then I was out at lunch at a con, and Neil came by my table. And
I remember this.
He was like incensed that I wasn't charging enough for sketches. So he went out to a Kinko's. He did this personally. He went out to a Kinko's and had a new sign printed up that said, Larry Hama sketches are now $200. And I came back from I had no line at all morning. That's why I went to lunch. I come back from lunch and I've got a line waiting to buy $200 sketches.
That's so freaking awesome.
So I go over to Neil. I said, what the heck happened here? And Neil said, look, everything is worth what you tell people it's worth. If you say something is worth nothing, it's worth nothing. But if you say something is worth $200, all of a sudden people are interested in it.
There's so much truth to that statement.
Yeah.
And
he's the one that convinced Chris Claremont to charge for a signature.
Yeah, because I remember Chris didn't even have limits.
And signing, literally signing thousands of comics, and for free. And Neil came by one day and said, "No, try it for one day." And I think Chris went home that day with something like $10,000 or something ridiculous.
Well, and I'm happy to hear that, because cons
from like nothing.
Cons they're not what they used to be for the comic book community. Mm-hmm. It was just one of the reasons. I remember John Byrne making a statement. I think it was at Mid Ohio Con, one of the last times he was there, that he was done because they were just changing everything. They would it used to be that they pick him up from the airport, pay for his ticket, and he was complaining about what they would, because he was like, they're starting to focus more on like these movie stars and TV show stars, and they're going to end up treating us like garbage. I remember Peter David even saying that he got kicked out of a buffet at the hotel that they were, or at the convention center, because it was behind the curtain and he got hungry and he went back there and it said, for guests. And the guy working back there was like, "Hey, this is for guests." And he's like, "I am a guest, see?" And the guy looked at him and he was like, "No, for real guests, like the TV shows and the movie stars that are here."
Yeah, well, I refuse to go to a con that has segregated green room. I years ago I went to a con in Calgary. It wasn't the big Calgary; it was a con in Calgary,
Mhm.
in Alberta. And I looked in at the celebrity green room, and it was they had a hot buffet, and they had coffee, tea, sodas. They had a whole rack of desserts and stuff. And I went to see the comic artists green room, and it was like a utility closet. They had a Mr. Coffee machine and a paper plate with some stale bagels on it. That was it. Uh, After that, I said, well, if I don't have access to the green room, I'm not going, because a similar, worse thing happened to me in Philadelphia. I went to the Philadelphia Comic Con, and the thing is, they call them Comic Cons, and they were using my name and my photograph to promote this thing. So I was like an official guest of the con. I'm in Artist Alley. I get there, set up. I said, I'll go stop in the green room and get a cup of coffee. I go to the green room to get a cup of coffee, and they wouldn't let me in the door. They said, "Oh, you're not a celebrity."
Just for coffee?
So yeah, I couldn't get a cup of coffee. So I went to see, Celebrity Row, and I realized that I had better movie, TV, and stage credits than 99% of the people that were there, who were all like, "Oh, I was the third zombie from the end in the last 3 episodes of Walking Shish Kebab." I mean, these were day players who had who didn't even have a character name. They were like the third zombie or something. So I posted on Facebook. I said, "Look, I'm at the Philadelphia Comic Con, and I was refused a cup of coffee in the green room because I'm not a celebrity." And literally within 5 minutes, it was on the front page of Bleedy Cool. And 5 minutes after that, the con people are down at my table demanding that I take it down. And I said, "Well, sure, I'll take it down, but where's my coffee?" And they never came through. They said,
With the
"Oh,
coffee? With
yeah,
a cup of coffee?
machine in the volunteers room." And I said, "Well, that's not going to cut it." And I said, "Look, that's it. I'm packing up and I'm leaving."
Good for you.
And they said, "Oh, no, 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 no." I eventually got them to give. They said, "Well, we'll tell you what. We'll give you food vouchers for any of the vendor vouchers for any of the vendors at the con. You can get drinks and lunch and anything like that." And I said, "Just for me?" I said, "No, that's not good enough. You have to do that for everybody in Artist Alley." And I got them to relent to that, but I never got them to never got access to the coffee in the green.
I was about to say, you're such a
Of course, I've
class.
never been invited back to Philadelphia, but screw them.
There's a lot of comments about your work. I love this one. Love Nth Man. That's right. Ahead of its time. So was Wolfpack. Oh my gosh. Yes. Mr. Hama, you've spoken about how you base characters on people to define them and keep them consistent. Have any of those people then said or done anything that surprised you to cause you to reevaluate the character? That's a good question. That isn't.
Have they done what?
Have those people that you have the characters based on said or done anything that surprised you, cost you to reevaluate the character?
No, I mean, a lot of them were folks that I served with, or knew through work, or like one of them was my cousin. one guy is a guy who's a letterer at Marvel. My friend Paul Kirchner, I changed his name to Kurt Schnur.
Oh, okay. Well done.
That's how I did that. But basically, the character, my friends didn't look like these characters, or you had any of the same military skills or attributes. But I'm talking about personality. If I nail the personality by keeping it really consistent to the people that I knew, I could keep track of it and not veer off track. Which is a very hard thing to do, and especially with other people writing this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I was never able to watch the animated stuff because they were all speaking in the wrong voices as far as.
I remember my friends were big into and I like the cartoon. It was a part of my childhood. But I just remember, they were like, "Oh my gosh, man, it's so good." And I was like, "Yeah, but in the comic books, they kill characters left and right sometimes." Oh my gosh, I don't want to spoil.
Yeah, but when I write Destro, I'm hearing Sean Connery in my head.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course.
When I write Cobra Commander, I'm hearing Orson Welles as Charles Foster Kane. This is the way I keep the dialogue and the inflections consistent.
Wait, what about Cobra Commander?
That's what I said.
Yeah, that's who.
Orson Welles in as Charles Foster Kane.
That's so okay. That's crazy. Because with the cartoon, I always heard Chris Latta's voice, who did the voice of Cobra Commander, also the voice of Starscream, and Orson Welles was Unicron in the Transformers movie. So I guess it kind of I've never heard you say that about Cobra Commander. Orson Welles, that's awesome.
Yeah, you have to do that in order to write consistent dialogue. Otherwise, the dialogue is all over the place. And one thing I'm known for is consistent dialogue. So
I do love the fact that you have every one of them have their own voices, right? Like that's the beauty of writing.
And people's manner of speaking is a reflection of their character. So.
I'm the best there is at what I do, but what I do best isn't very nice. There's a big 50th anniversary with Wolverine happening. Is there anything that you can tell us? Or are you a part of something that's going on, like an anthology series or maybe one of those retro series, which has been great? I loved your Patch retro series.
No, they don't tell me anything.
Oh man, I would love for you to tackle the character again. You wrote your Wolverine is so good.
Well, thank you.
My buddy Joey really enjoyed your G.I. Joe stories. Thank you so much for creating them. Snake Eyes is my favorite character. You made, I guess, out of your whole G.I. Joe run, right, would you say like most people are like Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow?
Yeah, well, my core characters are Snake Eyes, Scarlet, Storm Shadow, and Stalker.
Stalker's such an awesome character.
Everything, those are the root characters as far as I'm concerned.
We went through your bibliography of like all of your G.I. Joe stuff, but you also wrote a bunch of other G.I. Joe stuff like special missions. So the fact you said you're on issue 314, but you have written a lot more than that.
Oh, a lot more than 314. I wrote all the special missions.
Yes.
I wrote all the Impact comics that were included with toys, annuals, and special editions. Probably closer to getting inching up on 400, I think, altogether.
I know I know there's enough for more of these big books that they want to put out in box sets. So you've written Wolverine, you've written G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
So
Venom.
tell me about this Mounties versus Werewolves.
Well, that's something I came up with about 10 years ago. I thought, oh, they're probably looking for good programming in Canada, but it has to have Canadian content. I had a friend in Ottawa who said, yeah, we should partner up and do something like that. So I put this together, and he was never able to get anybody interested up there. So we just sort of let it peter out. But I kept puttering with it, and been buying books all along on the Mounties and on Native Canadian culture and historical stuff about that period. And one day I was talking to Guy Dorian. He said, well, you got anything, in the slush drawer? And I said, yeah, I've been, working on this thing for 10 years. And I think it could really fly. So we got together and put this all together. It's, I want it to be very moody, as with more of suggested horror than totally in your face all the time. It's sort of like it's sort of like classic werewolf combined with Deadwood, sort of.
Yeah, okay. I'm a big fan of Deadwood.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like that grittiness, but we're talking about an area that's even more remote than Deadwood, with much not even anywhere near the population density. So it was sort of designed as something that could be done for reasonable budget as a TV show, or a movie or a series or whatever. And so I started working on that as the concept, and then try to come up with some good characters to flesh it out. To me, it's the characters that are more important. The plot is just a framework to hang good characters on, because nobody ever remembers the plot. You don't come. It's like I used to tell potential writers and artists, look, you've been reading Peanuts all your life, but you can't tell me what happens in any one given daily Sunday Peanut strip. And you go, oh no, I can do that. Lucy is holding the football, and Charlie Brown comes running across the field, and I said, well, that's just a setup. What's the punchline of a specific one? And nobody can do it. And I said, but at the same time, if I said, write me a one-page character analysis and psychological profile of Lucy Van Pelt, you could do it. Because you've learned these characters incrementally over a long period of time, like the way you get to know real people. It's like, nobody went to see the next installment of Harry Potter because they thought, oh, the plot on the last one was bitching. you, you go
I don't
because
think I've ever heard anybody describe Harry Potter as
you go because you like those characters and you want to spend more time with the characters. That's the same thing with almost any of these franchises. I mean, so it makes the Avengers work. Nobody can remember the plot of an Avengers movie. First of all, it's too complicated. Ask anybody, what's the plot of the last Avengers movie?
the last one, the Infinity was Infinity War? No.
Yeah, what's
Endgame. Oh my gosh, I forgot. But this,
but who you can explain who all those characters are.
Oh, right, because it's about character. I think that's very important when it comes to a story, right? I can't remember who it was. Somebody was talking about how it doesn't matter what the setting is, what the story is. What matters is the characters, and you're right, because if you don't care about the characters, the story's not going to matter. The setting isn't going to matter. Your special effects aren't going to matter.
No, that's what's wrong with the movie industry is that, what the studios have, they have the system set up where they have these people called readers who are, usually, young women fresh out of college. This is their first job, and their job is they got a desk with stacks of scripts on them, and they read the scripts and they choose the ones that actually get read by a producer or a director. So, and the guidelines they are given are things like, does it have 3 acts, or their followable character arcs? They're all story points about structure, and almost not a single question about, hey, do I like these characters? Do I want to learn more about this character? No, and those should be the pertinent, most important questions. That's why a lot of movies suck.
When okay, I'm not going to argue with that. But a lot of truth behind that. So let me ask you, why the route of Kickstarter? Why did you and Guy decide to go to Kickstarter instead of like pitching it around to like Image or Dark Horse or IDW or
because we want to own it. I mean, we could pitch it around to all these people, but they're going to take 90% of it.
90%?
Yeah. Well, that's what, you go to a big company, like, a creator getting 2.5% from a big company is a big deal. I mean, so it was like, Michael Golden and I, between the two of us, we own 50% of Bucky O'Hare. He has 25%. I have 25%.
I love that. Whose idea was that, by the way, with Bucky O'Hare?
Neil Adams, because he gave us that deal because he was fighting for creator rights at that time. This was in the 70s. So he gave us a sweetheart deal. He has 50%. He had 50%, but he was putting his money into all the promo, and he was doing all the work. All Michael Golden and I had to do was write it and draw it. But the hard part of any of this stuff is selling it. It's pushing it through, hiring the lawyers, doing the paperwork. That's expensive, and that's a lot of man hours, and Neil was doing all of it. So, and I did really well by Bucky O'Hare. We sold 100 licenses, including the World Nintendo rights in 8, 16, and 32 bits. So I can't complain about that. But
And there were some new toys that were brought out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I was a big Bucky O'Hare fan.
And I get a piece of that. But, with the comic companies, they sold the foreign rights to all the Marvel comics to Panini, I think, years ago for peanuts. And so I go to Europe, and all these French and Italian and Spanish cartoonists come up to me and say, "Oh, you must be this multi-millionaire, because whenever we go into a comic shop, we see all this Larry Hama stuff with reprinted bound volumes and albums." And I tell them, I don't get a red cent of any of that. Zero on foreign sales. Sure. Yeah. And stuff is reprinted in something like 17 languages around the world.
How does it work when it's reprinted here, for example?
Excuse me?
How does it work when it's reprinted here?
When it's reprinted here, I get a royalty.
Now, does that go for?
I even get stuff on the digital stuff, but I don't get a single cent for any of the G.I. Joe stuff that's constantly in reprint. Because it's all owned by Hasbro.
Yeah. And I think there's a big, there's always this thing that happens, right? Like royalties, you can have a contract with a company. I'll just use Star Wars, for example. Star Wars was Dark Horse for a long time. So any reprints of somebody's work could be reprinted by Star Wars as a trade paperback or a hardcover, and then we get some kind of royalties from that. However, when Disney and then eventually that went over to Marvel, deals like that aren't honored. I assume that's just the way business is. I know that's the way it works in the corporate world. Like when I've been in many companies that have been bought out by another company, and the previous contract that I had with the company for making new programming or whatever it was, gone. And I assume that's the way it is in the comic industry too. Like if a company, for example, if you and IDW had some kind of deal,
G.I. Joe and the Transformers, right? If you get the license to do G.I. Joe and Transformers from Hasbro, you have the right to reprint all the Marvel, the IDW, and the Devil's Due material.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the deal. Now I got, when it was being published by Marvel, I got hefty royalty checks. But as soon as it left Marvel, that all stopped.
Yeah, I kind of figured that's the way it was. It sucks. Because I assume most people know ahead of time, like with the contracts on.
Yeah, but
this can't last forever.
It was all work for hire. Everybody was grown up. They knew what it was. But it was the only game in town. So it was either that or drive a cab.
Or you said flipping burgers earlier.
So I said, what? Flipping burgers, yeah.
Flipping burgers. Oh, man.
I'm not proud. I'll do any of that stuff,
Mr. Hama, I just want to thank you for your impact you had on my childhood. X-Men, the animated series, introduced me to Wolverine in the 90s, but it was you who made him my favorite superhero. Thank you so much. Absolutely. I agree with oh my gosh, you did make him my favorite. That said here.
You liked all that stuff, pick up, get involved with Mounties versus Werewolves.
How long is this book? Tell me a little bit about the
first issue is a double-sized issue.
Okay.
And then we're playing it by ear from there. I mean, if we continue to sell it and get it funded, I'm happy to do it forever. You know, I've never quit a book. They had to like pry it from my fingers. You know, I've written so many books out, you know, down to the cancellation. Because I'm not going to take on a book and go, okay, I'm going to do six months of this, and then I'm going to go on to the next book. I'm the long-term guy.
Now, I know that.
Why should I learn a whole nother universe? Keep on doing the same universe.
Now, Guy is doing the pencils, right? Guy Dorian?
Yeah.
Is doing the pencils. Sal Buscema is doing the inks. Is that right?
I think, well, a lot of it is up in the air. There'll be other people working on it. I'll probably be doing the breakdowns or layouts.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Because I noticed when I was looking a couple of days ago at like some of the people that are going to be doing it, like I noticed that one of Guy's covers is done by Kevin Conrad, who I love his inks. But then I also saw Sal, our pal Sal, on there, and I was like, what? I love that guy. And then you also had like Scott Hanna on there too.
You got Kelly Jones to do a cover too.
Yes, I saw that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I got this excited when I saw Sal, our pal Sal, man. That's great. The lead characters are David Lawrence, the Mountie, and Pierre Perdue. Is that how you would say it?
Yeah, my French isn't all that hot.
It's got to be better than mine.
I had all the Tintin books in French as a kid, you know. So I can understand what it is on the page. I have no idea how any of it's pronounced. You know, I read the Iliad and the Odyssey in the 6th grade, and I, you know, for years I thought Odysseus's wife's name was Penelope instead of Penelope. And I had no idea how to pronounce Odysseus. It looked like this letter salad.
I was the same way. I think I called him Odysseus.
Yeah. I was like, in my head, I was going, Odysseus?
Oh my gosh! I'm glad I wasn't the only one.
I had no idea how to pronounce D'Artagnan. You know.
Oh, I'm so glad we are on the same boat when it comes to
production. On the page, like D'Artagnan. You know. Oh, okay. That's a cool name.
Please tell us at least Skybound is treating you well, especially with this big success.
Very well. I get nice pieces of this stuff. They throw me some very big bones once in a while.
That's wonderful.
Very happy with them. They're really good to work with. Robert Kirkman called me personally to ask me to write it. So
I think my favorite story that I have of talking to you behind the scenes was before it was announced that Skybound owned the rights to these things. You were telling me, you're like, yeah, I'm still writing G.I. Joe. And I'm like, that's awesome. And we both knew because I had people that I talked to at IDW and Skybound, but we couldn't say. You're like, yeah, I'm going to be getting a check. Not from IDW now. And I just just remember that conversation we had. This is the last day to pledge, by the way, for this wonderful Kickstarter that's going on right now.
Go on it.
And I have left a link in the description of the video if you're watching this later today. But if you're watching it right now, you can go and check out the link here. I'm posting it again in the chat. And check out the different tiers that there are. And there's an awesome tier that's literally hanging out with Larry and Guy for a day. That's awesome. Going to like different comic book stores. Man, I don't think I could stop talking about Wolverine with you. Like, that would be so annoying after a while. But that is the link right there. And the cover's drawn by Guy Dorian and inked by Kevin Conrad. Cover B is Mark Spears, and the fifth is Kelly Jones. So, out of all the years that you've worked on so many characters, Venom and Generation X, Nth-Man, and
Batman.
Yeah, you were over at DC.
Wonder Woman for a while.
Yeah. What's been your favorite experience writing? Would you say G.I. Joe after all these years?
Yeah, I had a lot of, G.I. Joe is very easy for me to write, but I had a lot of fun writing the Nth Man.
Love that
book. A lot of fun working on Bucky O'Hare. Those are fairly close to my heart. And, but I enjoy it all. It's not onerous. I've been a very lucky boy. I get to get up every morning and do stuff that I like to do. Can't be more blessed than that. And people actually pay me to do it, which is it's even better.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's great that you're still doing this. Yes, we will spend the day with someone talking about anything, eating at places and going to a comic book shop. It also includes all the Kickstarter stuff, take a video and or photos and all that. That's awesome. Yeah, the whole time if I were to do that, I'd be like, you remember that time, Larry, when you wrote Wolverine? Yeah, that was awesome. Or G.I. Joe. People have no idea if all they knew of G.I. Joe was the cartoon, and when they get to read your comic, first of all, now I'll never read Cobra Commander with Chris Latta's voice. It'll have to be Orson Welles.
Let me make it perfectly clear that the voice actors that worked on the G.I. Joe material were really good. Well, I know a lot of them personally. In fact, I've known Keown Young since like 1976.
Wow.
Yeah, so because I used to do voiceovers also. So.
You have done so much. It's insane. It's insane. There's every corner of every part of my childhood you have been a part of, like in some way or another.
It's all completely by happenstance and chance. I never started out to do any of this. I got my first acting gig because I got in an elevator, and this is in 1973 or something, or 72, 73. This woman turned to me and she said, "Are you an actor?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You want to be one?" And she was a producer, an off-Broadway producer. She cast me in a production of Moby Dick at the South Street Seaport. I was Tesh Tago, the harpooner.
Okay.
I had to wear a loincloth. I had hair down to my waist at the time too. So. And people saw me in that, and I got another gig, and like I think the third or fourth acting gig I got was a Stephen Sondheim musical on Broadway called Pacific Overtures, which I did for over a year. These were all, I've always believed that when the train comes in the station, you should get on it, because you never know when that train is going to stop at your station again. And I don't want to wake up. I didn't want to wake up in 20 years, 40 years and go, wow, I should have done that.
So this is
I've always taken a chance, and for me, 80% of the time, it was the right thing to do. and all this accidental stuff. You know, if I hadn't been laid off from DC, I wouldn't have ended up.
Baba, ¿todo está bien?
I wouldn't have ended up at Marvel, and I would have never done G.I. Joe. So, you know, getting fired from DC was literally the best thing that ever happened to me.
In hindsight.
Yeah.
It's always in hindsight, right? I love watching MASH with my wife and pointing you out and say, hey, that's the guy that writes Wolverine comics. Thank you. How often do you hear that? How often do you people that didn't even know you were in MASH? Like, do you get that often at conventions?
Oh yeah, you know. Well, I sell an 8x10 of myself in MASH.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was a really fun gig because it was all shot at the set was on a ranch in Malibu, way up in the mountains, and you had to take a bus from the parking lot to get to the set. And at the set, they didn't allow anybody on set who wasn't in fatigues or hospital scrubs or period costumes. There were no vehicles allowed on the set unless they were Army vehicles, GI vehicles. The entire crew was dressed in fatigues. You know, so no matter where you looked, any angle you looked at, it was completely Korea in early 50s. It was Stanislavski to the extreme.
I love that these things were happening to you, and you were like, no, do you draw comics? Are you an actor? And I just got, and you went along for the ride, and that's an awesome life that you lived because you took it. You just said, yeah, let's go, let's do it. It's great.
Oh, I had a rock and roll band for 20 years. It was like
musician. I mentioned that earlier. Yeah.
It was an all cartoonist rock and roll band. Bobby London was one of our original members, one of the original Air Pirates, guy who did Dirty Duck. Gary Halgren, another Air Pirate, was our saxophone player. We had Brick Mason, who was S. Night Shyamalan's storyboard artist and second unit director. Our vocalist and trumpet player. Nelson Yamtov, who was in charge of licensed products at Marvel. He was the toy interface at Marvel. He was our drummer and harmonica player. And Mark Bright, MD Bright.
MD Bright. Oh,
yeah, he was our bassist. Yeah. So, and we got to play CBGB's, Irving Plaza, Danceteria, the Bitter End, and the entire New York City club circuit. So, but basically, it was just what we did instead of going bowling on Friday nights.
Got so much more badass than going bowling. No offense to bowlers. If I had a choice, like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. How do you miss those days? I know that, some of those people aren't here anymore. That time of working together with all these folks.
Well, that was, my stint at Marvel. I loved going into the office at Marvel because it was much different at the time. It wasn't so, tight sphinctered corporate. People just drifted into the office and hung out. I had artists and writers hanging out in my office all the time. And it was like one big party at Marvel. I couldn't wait to get into the office every day. And at the beginning, it was so much fun just sitting there, picking up the phone and saying "crazy." Yeah, and it was a very sort of tight-knit community. Everybody in comics knew each other and hung out together. when the first day Star Wars opened at the Lowe's Astor Plaza, and Chris Claremont went down there at like 6 a.m, stood in line. And as everybody from Marvel and DC showed up, he let us all in front of him. And people were a little upset about that, at the other end of the line. But by the time we had over 50 or 60 people, they couldn't really say anything. And we ran into the theater when the gates opened, and we took up the first 3 rows. A solid phalanx of us, 3 rows, 3 rows deep, looking up at that screen when that giant spaceship came overhead. It was like, oh. But it's amazing to have these shared experiences. We went to see movies in huge gangs. I must have seen the first Alien movie with like 20 guys from Marvel and DC.
Oh man.
We used to get these parties together to go see samurai movies at samurai festivals. And the people that would go to the samurai festivals were like Neil Adams and his whole family, Barry Smith, Mike Kaluta, Bernie Wrightson, Jim Starlin, the whole crew, Al Milgram. And we just take up 2 rows. One time I went to the Carnegie Hall Cinema because they were showing the Fritz Lang Siegfried movies, Ring of Nibelungen, and they had hired an organist. They had a big Hammond organ to play the Wagner score for this solid movie. So I got there like 10 minutes. The lights were already down and they were showing the movie. I got there that late. But I remember at the end of the movie, when the lights went up, I looked around and I realized I knew everybody in the theater. even Jeanette Kahn was there. It was pretty much 90% of the comic industry.
Man, what a life! That is so wonderful.
And then we would all play. We'd play softball. We had softball teams. Then we had a volleyball team. There was supposedly a DC volleyball team, but 90% of our players were Marvel.
You guys were scouting out players for Marvel.
We had Jim Shooter was on the DC volleyball team.
Wait, how did that happen?
Well, because Al Milgram was in charge of the volleyball team, and there was like very few anywhere near athletic people at DC. So we recruited all these people from. We had Jim Starlin, we had Jim Shooter, what's his name? Bob McLeod, and all these Marvel staffers, and it was a really good deal. Like DC was sponsoring it completely. We would go to get burgers and beers after the game, and they would pick up the tab, and our team uniform was a blue T-shirt with the Superman logo on it. And it was a good racket while it lasted, but then we made a big mistake by winning the league championship. DC wanted to throw us, a dinner or a banquet to celebrate, and that's when they found out that most the entire team was Marvel employees, and that was the end of the DC's volleyball team. A lot of fun.
Man, that sounds like such a blast. Like to be around at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Is the teacher apprentice still present in today's comic book environment? I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about, hey, I don't know anything about Wolverine. Can you send me 2 of your editors to talk to me about Wolverine over lunch? Like, do they still? I assume they still do something similar to this, right?
I have no idea how they do that, but one thing that we used to do at Marvel was they would have these retreats where every year they would take all the people that worked on X-Men books, and there were a whole slew of X-Men books at the time, and we go to some hotel out in the sticks for 3 days and hash out all the continuity for all the X books for the next year. And a lot of times there was a lot of table pounding and yelling and screaming, and it got pretty wild.
They still do. They still do like summer retreats. I don't know if it's exclusive for like X-Men, and I'm sure that must have been nuts because I mean, just even the editors and the writers at the time. Oh my gosh, to be a fly on the wall at those retreats with like, especially in those late 80s, early 90s. That was my era of X-Men. And your Wolverine was a huge part of that era. And okay, so I have to ask this. I have to ask this while I have you here. The Wolverine 75. When were you told they were going to rip out the adamantium from Wolverine? And whose idea was that? Was that editorial, or is that something that
that all came about at one of the retreats? There was it was divided 50-50. It was, and the amount of yelling and screaming going on. The pro bone and the anti bone people were just at each other's throats. I was adamantly pro adamantium and anti bone, but I got voted down. So I had to make the best of what I could out of it. So I tried to play it for the drama as much as I could.
So whose idea was it for the bone underneath the adamantium?
I can't remember.
I was always curious.
Harris, I'm not sure.
That was always a part of him. I always found that to be interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't, the anal retentive part of me couldn't fathom it. I couldn't see the logic, kind of. Like, what? They were bone all the time? How did, but they're like, they look bony. What is the adamantium automatically smooth it out into these smooth curved claws? I mean,
you're asking all the questions I was asking when I was a teenager.
Yeah. Well, that's even as a kid, stuff like that bothered me a lot. If the logic of the thing didn't work for me, that's why when I first started designing the original Bucky O'Hare stuff, I thought I wasn't going to compromise anything between what the toys look like and what the figures look like. So that's why all those Bucky O'Hare characters have 3mm holes in the bottoms of their feet, and all their equipment, it plugs into 3mm plugs on their belts and stuff. That's so for the sake of manufacturing the toy.
Oh man, you were thinking ahead of everything. Yeah. Wow.
So because I was always bugged as a kid when they would have to like change the stuff because it couldn't be made as a toy that way. And also, the character's like 3.5 heads tall, which is the Sonic the Hedgehog Sonic proportions, and these are the ideal proportions for these types of characters in video games. So I thought I was trying to think in terms of it being of all the material being able to cross these platforms, to be a comic book, an animated series, a video game, and a toy line, and also apparel. I think you have to think about all these things when creating new IPs these days.
Wow. I don't even know. I can't imagine very many people were thinking about things like that when you're creating something new, and then you're thinking ahead of, well, what logistically would the toy look like? It's very, you're almost like thinking way ahead of time. That's good. It's a good way of thinking. And definitely get excited when you see Mr. Hama and guys' names together on something. That's right. Everybody go and check out the Kickstarter that's going on right now.
Absolutely.
It's the last day.
Right now.
But no, don't just quite leave yet. We're almost there. Yeah, I remember designing the WWF Bendums with a 4.5 head high design. This is a good question. Who is your favorite character in G.I. Joe?
My favorite character?
Mm-hmm.
Snake Eyes. Yeah. Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. But
those are the two best characters. Yes, absolutely.
My 4 core characters are Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Scarlet, and Stalker.
Which became your 4 core characters. Yeah, that would make sense. Absolutely. When Larry Hama's name shows up on a comic, you put all the other comics to the side. There's a lot of truth behind that. Bucky O'Hare may have been the most energetic cartoon music intro ever. Oh my gosh, I agree with that. My wife and I listened to it with the kids. Love it. How involved were you, if any, with the cartoon creation and or Konami's NES and arcade games?
Well, pretty much nothing. But, I got to see all the video game concept drawings and backgrounds and all this. They were like amazing. So because we had to prove that through continuity, and I thought everybody did a really bang up job on all that stuff. It was really well done.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions. How often was there interference?
Bucky O'Hare game, though, is really hard.
The Nintendo one or the arcade? Because I played both. I love both.
I had the home version, and I couldn't get past level 3. Look, I wrote all the cutscenes for the Wolverine Activision game. And then that was like 120 pages of script. And after I finished that, they said, well, now can you storyboard the whole thing? That took about 5 months.
Yeah, because, that's no big deal. Storyboarding something like that. Sure.
Yeah, I storyboarded the whole thing. And then like a year later, they send me the disc. And I slip it in the machine, and I couldn't get past level 2. How do I, how do I see the cutscenes that I wrote? And they said, well, you got to just play it through. I said, can you even give me a cheat sheet or something? I never got past level 2 or 3 of the Wolverine game either.
Oh, the Nintendo one?
Yeah, although I did get to ride the train to Raccoon City, and what's it called? That was one of the few video games that I actually got to the end of. But
Raccoon City, the one that comes to mind is just Resident Evil.
Yeah, Resident Evil. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was the third one. At the end, you get on this train and it goes into Raccoon City.
So what you're saying is you dabbled in video games, but you never perfected it.
No.
You were too busy being a rock star, man. You were too busy being an actor, writing comics and drawing awesome comics. And
I would get either too bored or my thumbs would get too tired.
Yes, that's right. Sore thumbs.
Yeah.
That's all part of it, Larry. How often was there interference from X-Men writers and editors while writing Wolverine? I can imagine that was a monthly thing.
Oh, interference?
As in, like, you can't use this character, you got to use this character. Was there a lot of that going on?
People left me alone. They knew better.
You were on that book for a long time. I want to say outside of G.I. Joe, I think that is the longest stint you had on a comic, right?
8 years, yeah.
Yeah. So that is no joke. What made you end up leaving the book?
I think they fired me.
Okay, that will do it. I never knew. I was out of comics when that was happening. I had no idea. So when I came back to comics, and I started picking up.
Eventually, I got blacklisted from both Marvel and DC for like years.
You did? What did you do?
What?
What did you do to get blacklisted?
Well, in one instance, I told the head honcho the truth.
Okay.
They will always nail you to the cross for telling the truth. But he had me do the storyboards for a Fumetti that he was playing, a Spider-Man Fumetti.
Okay.
And it was this 100-page script written by his girlfriend, and I read it, and I told him, look, this is going to be impossible to shoot as a Fumetti. There's a different scene on every page. And I said, do you know what a setup is? And his reaction was that I didn't know what I was talking about. I was just hired hand, and I should just do the job. So I wrote it. I mean, I drew it, and they went out and shot it. They went like a huge amount, like almost $1 million over budget. And then they handed it to the online department, and the digital guy sat on it for 3 days before he had the guts to tell the man that there wasn't enough bandwidth in the universe to put it online. And the next morning, that whole department was fired. And I couldn't get a Marvel editor to return my calls for years. So that was the end of my tenure at Marvel. I took the blame for his disastrous decision. And then, so when I was over at DC, and a big honcho over there called me into the office and offered me Birds of Prey. This is way back. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, it's nice that you thought of me for this, but I really think this has to be written by a woman. And by the next day, I was blacklisted. So what can you do? The thing is, it's all about personalities, and I don't hold any company. Companies are not the people. The people are. So, and everybody gets replaced. So, by the time Marie Javins came in the door over there, and I was cool with her. So I'm back. I'm back in the good graces at both Marvel and DC. But
What did you do with your time while blacklisted?
what?
What did you do with your time while blacklisted? Out of curiosity.
I tried to get my teaching credentials. I tried to get a teaching gig.
Uh-huh.
I almost got a gig at SVA teaching comics, but apparently there were teachers there that had tenure that wanted those hours, so they withdrew their offer after I had gone through all the rigmarole to get all the certification and stuff. I was writing stuff for people overseas, for Osprey. I did graphic history books. I did whatever piecemeal stuff I could find for between 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
Had very little. Couldn't get any comic work.
Were you going to conventions, like appearing at shows? Because you weren't charging then either, though, so that wouldn't have.
Well, first of all, I didn't get invited to a single con while I was writing G.I. Joe at Marvel. I was not considered. Oh, I did, and I never. None of those G.I. Joe comics ever got a single write-up in any fanzine because, all the fandom in the 80s was controlled by the previous generation of fans. The fanboy geeks were, those guys were in their 30s and 40s. And they thought G.I. Joe was just crap. They thought it was.
No.
That was what they thought of all licensed toy books.
Yeah, and that was the problem with that book. I mean, to be honest with you, though, a lot of that has changed in the way that we see comics.
It wasn't until the 10-year-old kids that were actually my readers got old enough to have disposable incomes and start their own fanzines and run their own conventions that I started getting invited to conventions again.
That's nuts, Larry.
Yeah. Well,
you did more than just that, though. I mean, you were writing Wolverine, and at one time you were writing Generation X, and then of course you went over to DC. But I don't know. That just boggles the mind.
Well, the thing is, the only reason I got Wolverine to write was it was about to be canceled. The sales were very low, and I guess they figured Hama couldn't mess it up any more than it already was. But a year later, it was a number 2 selling book in the country, and I went back and I said, "Oh, first of all, I was trying to get other writing work after G.I. Joe was the number 1 book in the country." They said, "Oh no, G.I. Joe is a fluke; doesn't count." It's all because Hasbro put money into advertising. You had nothing to do with it.
Oh,
so when I turned Wolverine around, it was number 2 selling book in the country. They said the same thing. Oh, Wolverine is a fluke. He's not an ordinary X-Men character. He's a very, he's in his own world. I said, and you're not responsible for that. So I couldn't get any other, writing work until they were about to cancel the Avengers. And they were right, though, that I was never offered a single Marvel title that was an A-list title while it was an A-list title. Go figure. I was just happy to get any work. I still am.
I'm sorry. Jeez, it's so hard to hear that because it's just, the way companies are ran. But you're right. I mean, if you think about it, if you take a step back, you said something earlier that kind of spoke to me. I've been fired. I've lost my job a couple times, but the last time, that was it. I mean, I've had enough of IT and corporate world after 20 years. But one of the things that I do remember looking back on was every one of those people that let me go from my job before 2020. I can't. When was that? 2016, I think 2015. They're gone. To trim the budget down, they got rid of my department, and all those people are gone. And then the new people that they got in there, because I still had friends that worked there, hired the same department that we used to have. So I mean, it's just something that it's business, right? It's what they do.
Policy is that if you stayed at someplace too long and you kept getting raises, at one point they realized, oh, well, we should just fire this guy and hire a new guy
for a lot less money. Absolutely.
So there's no loyalty, and there's no gratitude. So, but I can't. I'm not bitter. I can sit here and laugh at it. I know people, because that sort of bitterness just erodes your soul. That and holding grudges and anger. And I'm totally with letting it all go, letting it slide.
I think that's a good way to be.
For all the non-recognition that I got at Marvel, I made a ton of money. I made really good royalties and all that stuff, and I did very well. And I'm doing okay. So I can't complain, really. And like I said, getting fired from DC was the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. So
because that propelled you into this career that you've made out of everything and learning and not giving up. I do. That is a very commendable thing too. It's at one point you could have been completely like, you know what, I'm done. I'm you even said so at the beginning, right? You were talking about, I didn't need to make comics. I could have been flipping burgers and making more money. At one point you could have said, I'm done with this world. It's twice now shut its doors in my face. So maybe I should take that as a call from the universe. But you didn't. And I think that says a lot about you and persistency, and a lot about your character too, because you were waiting for another door to open because you knew that it would, just from your life experience and from everything that had happened up until that point. And I think that says a lot about you. And I'm glad. I'm glad that you stayed and you're part of this.
Well, I never thought anything would last. We started G.I. Joe. We thought, if we get 2 years out of this, it'll be good. The toy companies themselves never thought, Hasbro never thought that G.I. Joe would last that long. They were ready to dump it on the third year because that was the established wisdom in the toy industry, that a toy lasted 3 years. Nobody wanted to get stuck with warehouses full of Cabbage Patch dolls or Beanie Babies ever again. So that their wisdom was that, even if it's doing really good in the third year, better drop it or else we're going to get stuck. But on the third year of G.I. Joe, they decided to take a chance. They took a flyer and it paid off. They kept it going. So my kudos to Hasbro for being that brave at that juncture.
And now we have a multi-toy line. I mean, we've got the classic line, we have the classified line, we've got the comics. I think there is a movie in the works, or at least I heard there was. I don't know if it will come or not, but whatever. I just think it's and there's a screening of G.I. Joe too, the movie. I saw that. Who's writing? Joshua Williamson He's going to be at one of these screenings in California or something, like with Skybound doing these things. And meanwhile, you keep writing the Larry Hama verse of G.I. Joe and continuing the adventures of these characters, no matter where they may end up getting published later on. I love that. I think that's the best thing about this story is that people don't realize. And my favorite answer is, oh yeah, it's its own thing. You don't have to read anything else. You don't have to read the Energon universe. You can enjoy Larry Hama's G.I. Joe, and that's it. And it's still going to this day.
No, there's plenty to catch up on.
Well, we've got a lot of back issues. I hope we have I talked to the editor that was in charge of the box set. I had an interview with him, and I was like, there's enough material for a second box set from the IDW series. Just saying. And that can be collected in another box set. So much of your work that I'm still shooting for Nth Man and Nam one day to be collected in an omnibus. That would be great. I just want to remind everybody that, again, the Kickstarter ends today. So if you want to go and check it out, support this wonderful, wonderful creator that is still kicking ass and writing comic books to this day. And here's the link.
The thing about this Kickstarter is that I actually get some money, and I get some ownership, and there's very few things that I have ownership of. I sit by every day and see other people make millions off of what I created, and I don't get any of it. So this is my chance to get a small piece of the pie. So, my thanks to everybody that's bought into it and or will.
And at this moment, I just want to thank Larry for being here, for taking time out of his day, for Guy for putting all this together. And I just it was a blessing to get to talk to you for this long and to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes and to talk about your wonderful long history. And people may not even have realized just how influential you were to a lot of our youths. Like, when we were growing up, you were a part of it in some way. And I think that's wonderful. It says a lot about you. Whether you were watching MASH when you were young, you may have ran into a Larry Hama episode, or whether you were watching Bucky O'Hare in the 80s, or even collecting the toy lines, or playing the video games, and of course, reading the comics of G.I. Joe and Wolverine and so many others. I think you've been there as a big part, or even like things like Conan hiring Christopher Priest, who speaks fondly of you, by the way, anytime I've ever talked to him, who thinks very highly of you, just like I think a lot of the folks do that have worked with you in the comic book industry. So thank you all so much for watching, and go and check out the Kickstarter. The link is in the description of the video if you can't get to it while we're live, but it does end today. And right. Like I said,
thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
You are welcome back anytime you want to.
Okay.
Anytime you want to. I love hearing your history of just working in the comic books industry, and the ups and definitely the downs, but yeah, it definitely helps. And yes, Peter Porker forever.
Okay.
Fans of Peter Porker, that's right. Thank you everybody for watching, and spread the word. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Bye.